and he's the speaker. Usually he does all this for the rest of us who occasionally speak up here on the Saturday workshops, but he's like a one-man show. He's got some support, but we're so appreciative for this setup. I'm really blown away by this wonderful display of desert plants, and I see that it's even dark enough in here right now for that little evening primrose to have its flower open. So this is pretty cool. Come up and see it. Again, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Kevin Allison will be here in just a minute. I am Mike Evans, the president and founder of Tree of Life Nursery, and I really love listening to Kevin give a presentation on anything that he wants to talk about, because he puts a lot of time and effort into the presentation itself, and it's coming from a place of pretty deep knowledge. So we're really privileged to have him share on desert plants today. Recently, I have come to the conclusion after 45 years in this gig that if we present the idea of native plants, especially to landscape professionals, as being a specialty garden, like a palm garden, rose garden, Shakespeare garden, kitchen garden, herb garden, fruit garden, tropical garden, flower garden. You could name a lot of specialty gardens. We don't see very many anymore around in public spaces, common areas of HOAs. I could go off and keep going, but you know what I'm saying. It's pretty homogeneous, it's pretty boring, it doesn't tell story, and it's not, none of them are specialty gardens. So when I say that native plant garden is a specialty garden, people kind of perk up and say, oh, you mean it has a theme, it has a story, it has its own narrative. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Well, today we're going to hear about a garden that is a specialty garden within a specialty garden, which is really cool. A desert garden as in context as a native plant garden. So it's a specialty, which I think is a very cool concept. And you would say, well, wait, I live near the coast, and why do I care? Well, because you can have desert plants in your native plant garden. Think about Torrey Pines with jojoba and Mojave yucca. Think about Baja California, where the desert meets the sea, or the Sonoran coast on the Sea of Cortez. And so there's some marvelous landscapes not far from here, and indeed right here in Southern California, where the desert or vestiges of the desert do meet the sea. But if you live further inland or in the desert, or you want a complete desert theme in your garden here, that works as well without the other plants. So Kevin's going to go into all that, and I'm really looking forward to this talk. I'm a desert rat at heart, and so is Kevin, though now he's becoming quite an expert in sailing and the sea, and you may follow him on SV Californica, the name of his boat, and his new adventures as an explorer across the channel into the Channel Islands, paddling ashore and botanizing and looking at the vegetation and the natural history, natural wildlife of our Channel Islands, which, by the way, have sort of a desert idea to them at times, especially San Clemente Island. Anyway, it's not my talk, it's his. Come on up. Help me welcome Kevin Allison.
All right, thank you, Mike. And yes, definitely a fellow desert rat. I don't know if a lot of people have been out into the desert, but it's definitely a unique spot. It's a very healing spot too, if people have been there, and there seems to a different feel. When I first moved there, it was kind of unexpected. I was kind of displaced where I was going to live at the time, and my brother lived out there and said, come live with me. And I'm like, but I'm really looking into horticulture and trying to, figure out this new career. It's just, desolate out there in the desert and not a whole lot grows. Turned out that was completely not the case. There is so much life out in the desert and so much biodiversity and plant life. They're just super adapted and have this amazing evolutionary ability to survive where it is. It just happens to be very hot and dry. And so so I fell in love with the desert. It actually was where I started and a lot into horticulture and everything, and eventually landed me here, which I'll get into. So this talk is going to go just not on all the deserts of the world, but just the California deserts. But really what this talk is going to be focusing on is the ecology and evolutionary traits and evolution of deserts and the plants themselves there. So how they got there, or how they evolved to live there in that case. So we kind of appreciate these amazing ability to live in such a hot and dry area. And so we'll also go into some of the ecology, why the desert's so dry, and everything like that. And then eventually I'll get into actually how you can then use these in your garden and kind of the benefits of using them as well. So again, a little overview. I'm going to go into what are the deserts. I really want to look at the why. You know, we know deserts are really hot and dry, but why? And so, and really thinking about that and really starting to understand ecology and where you are on this planet and why things are the way they are in the natural world around you. So you can understand it, you can appreciate it, and feel a part of it as well. And again, we'll go into a lot into the adaptations because I just think they're so fascinating. And there's a lot of them here. And then eventually, at the end of this talk, if you're not familiar, you then will probably learn a lot of these the evolution and adaptations of these plants, and then start to see them as well. And then you start to understand how this plant is right there in front of you, evolved to be there and live there in the world around you. So, and then, yeah, we'll go into horticulture and gardening. If you guys have any questions on that specifically as well, we can go into that also. So, a little introduction. I love this book. I tried to get it for Casa La Paz. It was from the 40s. But it's called What Kind of Cactus Is That? With a Z, is that? And it's the who's who in the desert. And it actually does a really good job of cartoon style going in and explaining a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, evolutionary traits and what the desert plants are in a really comical way. So right now we're going to go into an introduction. So my start with the desert is, well, one, I started working at this place as a volunteer and then eventually getting hired at the Living Desert. Has anyone been there before? Yeah, I figured Kurt had. So this is a really incredible place. If you haven't been there, I highly suggest it. It's a small zoo and botanic garden, but really I should say that backwards. It was a botanic garden first that then became a zoo. And it's really well done where all the animals are then immersed in all the plants and unique plants of where they occurred. And so that is trying to do all the deserts of the world. So they do have a lot of Africa as well. But they do have a whole North American section as well with separating into different areas of the deserts here in North America. I think, Kurt, have they started Australia? I know they were thinking about it. They've started it? It is? I gotta get out there. I haven't been out there in a while. So, and I also went to school there, and I went to school in horticulture, but I also majored in not just environmental horticulture, but also natural resources. So, uniquely, Kurt, wave your hand. So this is Kurt. He's really shy. He won't like. He was my professor out there. He taught me a lot of the natural world of the deserts and the natural resources of the world, but also in the desert as well. We did a lot of exploring around. So if I misspeak, if I'm wrong, you can blame him. It's all his fault. It's just what I was told. So, but welcome. So yeah, so I went to College of the Desert, got my degrees there in those two fields, before then moving to here, which is the complete opposite spectrum. So I went from one of the driest places in North America, probably the driest, I think, to then one of the wettest in North America as well. And so I moved to the Big Island, where I then transferred for a degree out there, doing coastal resource, watershed management, really ecology and forestry, with some specialty skills in horticulture. But what I saw here, and actually also living in the desert, was the full spectrum of how plants have to live where they live. And so I even saw, volcanic eruptions and lava spewing and brand new earth being made, and then the story and sequestration of plants then thereafter establishing on brand new earth and land and evolving into different habitats and also just establishing where they are, and all these evolutionary traits. So it really was a unique experience over those last few years to really start to try to see plants from a whole different paradigm. and perspective. Okay, so we have a lot of really good books. Patty did a great job. She's the manager at Casa La Paz. She asked me which books I wanted for this talk, and I gave her a couple ideas. One of them is definitely this one, Why Oh Why Are the Deserts So Dry? Kind of a Dr. Seuss way of also learning of not just what the deserts are in the ecosystem, but other plants and animals there as well. But she's tailored a whole bunch of them, other really good books, wildflower resources, and also natural history books, and indigenous people's uses of desert plants as well. So I've displayed a whole bunch out there. Also Baja, which is like, as Mike mentioned, where the desert meets the sea. We have some resources on that as well, where there's really, really cool plants. So take a look at that. I also heard that all the desert type plants, they'll see it has a blue dot on it. Just for today and for this talk, there is a discount on those books themselves. So, and yeah, this Dr. Seuss one is one of those. So if you have some kids, or you're a kid at heart, or you just love Dr. Seuss as I do, it's a great, great book. Okay, so we're going to set the stage here. So why, oh why, are the deserts so dry? I'm thinking about that. Like, we know they're hot and dry, but have you ever thought why that is the case? It just happens to be a spot where they're really hot and dry? Well, yes, but there's reasons for that. And so we'll just really start to, this is kind of where we are, right? Orange County, near the coast, Southern California. So we have the ocean here, and we have this oceanic plate. And that's coming in, and it's actually converging with the continental plate, so the continent. And from that, emerging, you're having a whole, what's called subduction and other things like that, where it's turning all these, in kind of buckling and moving rocks up higher, and there is some volcanic component as well. But that is what's actually forming those mountains, so the uplift and everything from those two plates converging. And so that's why we have the Santa Ana Mountains, we have San Gabriel's, and all those near us, near the coast, and then even a little bit further as you go into the Rockies and all those as well. But it's from this type of geological features creating mountains. So here we have the Santa Ana Mountains down here, Idlewild, with San Jacinto. You have San Gabriel and San Bernardino. You have closer down by north of LA, you have the Santa Monica Mountains, and all that you can see. There's also another interesting geology where it's kind of shifted in a little bit of a clockwise fashion, or a counterclockwise fashion. But that is the mountain ranges around us. And that is what causes a lot of our deserts and what's called the rain shadow effect. So if you see off the ocean, we have, if everyone's been a kid living near Southern California, you get out in June around that time for summer, and you head to the beach, and you're ready to get, sunburnt and hang in the sand and swim in the ocean, and then it's just completely foggy and cold. And people that know the June gloom and May gray. Well, a lot of moisture and everything accumulates around the coast with the ocean and the radiation that forms these clouds, and water then comes in. And as it meets those ocean, or that meets the mountains, it then squeezes like a sponge, and it condenses all that air and moisture and water, and it causes a lot more rain up into where we know where our forest areas are. And so as it drops all that moisture and air, and that air continues out, it then goes to what's called the leeward side. The windward side is the wind coming off of the ocean. Then it leaves all this dry air that comes into the area in and around in the desert. And so that's why you have a lot of a really dry atmosphere or an environment into the deserts. And in addition to that, water is a very temperature regulating property. That's why we have life on Earth, is because of water in such mass here that it's able to keep us all in a nice, regulated, kind of sustainable temperature globally for life to exist for us. Now, since there's so much less moisture out in the desert, it's actually really easy for it to get a lot of that solar radiation to then get really hot. And so that's why the deserts are dry and hot. And so here we can see here. You can see this is a Google Earth image. You can see the kind of the mountain ranges through there, and you see a lot of the green right on that side of the mountains. And so those are a lot of our forested areas. And then right as you get onto the other side to that, to let's say, even around here to like Temecula and to where like Lake Havasu, not Lake Havasu, can't think of the lake right there. Anyways, all that area, and then also Palm Springs, up in here, and the Mojave and Joshua Tree, that's where you see a lot of that dry area. So we have a few different types of deserts. So this talk is going to go more towards the California and North American deserts. So we have where we live, or the closest one to us, is called the Sonoran Desert. Now the Sonoran Desert goes down into and around Mexico in the state of Sonora, and also parts of Baja as well. But there's actually a subsection as well of the desert, of the Sonoran Desert, where Palm Springs and the Coachella Valley and all around that area, everything kind of west and around the Colorado River is the Colorado subsection, which is actually much hotter and drier as well. And so you have on the other side gets a little bit more monsoonal influence and gets just a little more summer rains, and also just in a distribution around with other mountains, you have other parts of the Sonoran Desert where you have way more of those type of cactus and columnar cactus that we know, like Oregon pipe or the saguaros, the real iconic kind of desert plants as well. So there's a little bit of difference. Those are called the Sonoran subsection, as well as we have Coachella Valley, which is the Colorado subsection. And so if you ever go out in Palm Springs and you see all the windmills on your side as you're getting out there from here, and you look out towards Joshua Tree and you see these bluffs and hillsides all right there, directly on the other side of that, and in Joshua Tree, and expanding much further out, is the Mojave Desert. So you actually can almost see two different desert types right next to each other. If you go up a little bit further towards Nevada and Utah, where it gets into a little bit higher elevation, you get a little bit cooler, you get a little bit more moisture, you're also going to have what's called the Great Basin Desert. So all these have different geological features, different environmental characteristics to them, and from that, you're going to have different types of plants. And so they're all desert plants, and they're all going to have these desert adaptations, but they're going to be different in their geography, or what's called their biogeography, and their distribution to live where they live. And then if you go further out, you have then the Chihuahuan Desert, which is closer towards Texas, has a little bit more kind of tropical kind of influence as well. And that's around, and also goes down into Mexico as well. So this blew my mind when I first heard about this, but deserts are actually really, really new ecosystems. They're really new environments in our historic tale here of the existence of plants and ecosystems on the Earth. So, especially ours here with the California deserts, they're only about 12,000 years old. And so talking in eons of evolution, that's really, really recent. In fact, some of the most recent type of ecosystem habitats we have now is the desert. And so that is from a transition of climate change. Now we've heard of climate change and involvement with human making that a little bit more rapid and things like that. I'm not meaning that. I'm meaning that just these changes that we naturally have with climate changes actually evolved a new type of habitat or new type of ecosystem called the deserts. And so this occurred around the Holocene era, which is around 12,000 years ago, and it is a desertification. So you're actually having a drier, hotter summer temperatures and decreased rain and everything like that. And it's expanded to right about that 12,000 years is about where we know and see the types of plants that we see now out in the deserts. And a great example of that is creosote, which we have a couple here. This plant just deserves a lot of respect. This plant is the medicine cabinet of the deserts. It is definitely the more dominant plants in and around the deserts that we know around here, and not just the Sonoran, but the Mojave Desert as well and other areas. But this plant, there's actually also a still living plant called king clone out in the Mojave Desert that is about around one of the earliest types of plants still alive from that real new transition. So it's about close to that 12,000 years old, and it's called king clone. And why it's called a clone is because you see how there's a ring right here? So it's actually the central plant that was living at one time kind of died out, but it sent out runners, and new plants then formed from that. And it kind of just radiated out and out and out further over thousands and thousands of years. It's still the same living plant. And you actually can see it with the sycamore behind you as well. So this sycamore here was, at one time, one larger central trunk type of plant. And you guys have seen suckers come off of trees, right? Well, that's what you're seeing in this as well. You're seeing that central trunk has died, and those suckers then spread it out, those that died, and just more and more will radiate out into these, and now you see all these bigger multi-branches. So this plant is very old, but it's changed over its time, but it's still the exact same genetics, still the exact same plant. It just had different vegetative parts that moved out and out. You see that with here. So that plant, and this one, the sycamore too, very, very old. I haven't seen it myself. I really want to go take a trek out to go see if we can find this. Okay. So what really also fascinates me is the adaptations on how plants live in such a hot environment. I think the hottest it ever got while I lived out there was about 121. And I worked out there too. So I worked in the summer outside during all that. It was a challenge. Really stressful for me. These plants have adapted in ways to be able to not only live, but thrive there in those types of environments. So we'll go through a lot of them. And then you can see this is a gorgeous, just all this collage of photos looks like a nice desert garden, or what you would see out in the deserts. But each of these photos is showing a really unique adaptation and traits to live out there. So one of those is within the roots. So if you look at different roots of desert plants, a lot of them will have really shallow roots. And you'd think they would have real deep roots, right? Well, some do. But a lot of the plants have really shallow roots because they have what's called monsoonal rains. So kind of summer rains, or even when you get normal rains out there, water is such a scarce resource for a lot of desert plants that they're going to be able to pick up water before it evaporates. Even if it's just a little bit of rain and it doesn't get that deep, it'll be able to pick up and use and store that water, and make sure that they're able to use it to be able to survive. So you'll see that with even like the saguaro and the cardones and all these big, really heavy plants that are storing water. They'll have a lot of shallow roots that'll be spread out, almost like the bottom of a wine glass. To be able to hold that big structure, but also be able to pick up moisture as it can. And then, if you ever see a mesquite tree or an acacia, which I think has switched its genus name now, it's no longer that. A lot of those will actually have really deep roots, but that gambled on a really adaptive trait as well, and it's going to be able to send its roots way down to try to get to a water table. And there is. We have an aquifer, a big aquifer in and around our local deserts here. But if you see mesquite trees, and I think a lot of indigenous peoples and a lot of geologists as well will look for this plant because they know there's a water table or an access nearby. And so acacias are actually one of the only type of plants that will grow roots into dry soil. All other plants will either be seeking it or need a moisture soil to be able to grow, and it's kind of chasing it as it gets more, and that's how you establish plants in a garden. But this is one of those unique plants that will actually keep going into dry soil and be able to find it, and then tap into that groundwater and be able to grow. Ocotillos are kind of this transitional, somewhere in the middle between those two types of plants. Cactus and other things up on rocks, they'll kind of have their fibrous roots around to be able to pick up moisture as well. And then thorns. People know thorns when they talk about desert plants, especially with cactus. But thorns themselves, you can see here with this Pachycereus, this cardone, and a few others, and even trees and other types of plants out in the deserts will have thorns. But why? I want you guys to keep asking why as scientists, and while you're here on Earth, just keep asking why on everything. But really think in those terms. And so there's more than just what people think, which is stay away, don't hurt me, don't eat me. Because again, water is such a unique resource, or such a valuable resource out in these really dry climates, that there are going to be animals and things that want to access that water. And a lot of them do get their water strictly almost from the vegetation that they eat. And so desert tortoises are like that, and some other types of animals as well. So that is a method. That is a method to adapt and be able to prevent herbivory, or being eaten, because these plants are stuck in the ground, right? They can't just run away. And so thorns is a way to do that. And they're actually adapted or modified leaves, also stems, but modified structures of vegetation to be able to create a protective type of anatomy. But what's really unique too is that this is a leaf. You're seeing a lot of different leaves there on the plant. So yeah, there's no way an animal is going to be able to get around that caging almost with all those thorns on that barrel cactus. So protection is one trait of thorns, but really, so we have shade cloth on a lot of our new and tender plants out in the greenhouse and in our growing areas. Thorns are actually about that same thing for this plant, this cactus. So it's actually shading its structure, because you have really intense heat, that can do a lot of damage to the plant, having strict, just constant beating of really, really hot sun. And so you can tell on this, yes, it's there, but all the green, the photosynthetic part of the plant, is actually protected by all those thorns. And you can see it here. All these, if you look at cactus now, I want you to look past just the thorns as protection, although that is an adaptive trait, but it's also sunscreen for the plants as well. And again, this actually, it's the same plant, but I think this is called Oreocereus, but I could be wrong. Old man cactus is another name for it. But this type of cactus here actually has different types of anatomy. It does have these little hairs and everything, which are modified type of leaves and structures, as well as thicker thorns kind of hiding in there as well. So it's using all those type of adaptive traits to be able to grow in such an environment. And then succulent storage. So a lot of people think of, it's funny when they think of native plants too, especially around this area, they're like, oh, well, those are all what? Cactus and succulents. And it's like, well, those do occur around, but I don't know what kind of Willy Wonka world you go on hikes and see just cactus and succulents everywhere. But there is a really adaptive trait to drought. And a lot of these desert type of traits are seen in other environments, not just the desert. It's just critical in the desert. So in the chaparral and in the coastal sage scrub, especially around, as Mike was mentioning, in my explorations around the coast and islands, a lot of those areas can be really dry too. So a lot of those type of plants and different type of ecosystems also have these adaptive traits to dry conditions and conserving water and being able to live in those types of arid environments. But succulent storage is one of those. And so that's the ability to store water. And so if you guys have a cactus or a succulent type plant and you never water it, you may see it start to shrivel and dry, especially if you go out hiking in the deserts or anywhere. You'll see the cactus, pads will get really shriveled up. You can see in this cartoon here. If you water it, you can actually almost quickly start to see them plump back up. I always think of them as, you do have to water your cactus, everyone. If you want a really nice, healthy type of plant, because that's what it's wanting. It wants to take up, and like I said, with those roots, and pull up all that water when they can I think of them kind of like these just unique water balloon plants that are just really efficient at holding on and storing that water through periods of drought. So you can see here's an agave where I broke off a leaf, and you can actually squeeze out and see that it's stored all that water. You can almost squeeze it and have it drop in ways. Okay, another type of environment or adaptation, and you see this really well with this plant here, jojoba or Simonsia. This plant, no, not Siri, Simonsia. Anyways. There's no one in my contact name, Simonsia. All right, I don't know how to turn that off. Okay. Anyways, but vertical arrangement of those leaves. It's a really awesome kind of adaptive trait of plants to be able to in the desert. So what it's doing, think of like a solar panel almost, but it's the opposite. It's not trying to lay flat and capture all that sunlight, although it is. It's going to go vertical and avoid the direct sun hitting it. And so you can, if you put like a time lapse on this plant, you actually will see the leaves move with the sun and avoid getting hit directly onto that plant, because solar radiation, and the more and more as it hits, it actually will heat up, and more of that plant can lose more water that way. So it's actually being able to orient its leaves in such a way that, I'm going to try to get this up. There we go. It's going to orient its leaves in such a way to avoid that. It's going to avoid that direct radiation. It's going to avoid losing water and heat and damage to those actual cells. But also, if you note, this plant has really thick leaves as well, so there's a little bit of that succulent storage in there. And also that it's really rough, thick cuticle layers on it, so that's another way that it's a little toughened up and able to not lose as much water. And then also, it has a bit of almost this bluish green, or what we call almost glaucous. You'll really see that with like succulent dudlias or other type plants. That'll actually radiate and bounce light and off of the plant, so it kind of is like a little bit to prevent a lot of that radiation and warming up. Okay, bipinnate leaves. So you probably see this type of leaf botany, or this leaf anatomy of a lot of desert plants. You can see it a little bit here with this creosote. You definitely see it with this palo verde. You can see it with the Caesalpinia here, the same plant up here, and the Felusia and a few other desert plants. You'll really see that type of leaf structure. So can anyone guess how many leaves you see here without going over? Price is Right style. Exactly. One leaf. That is just one leaf. So if you think that this plant has adapted to have what I call, it's still one big leaf, and those are the veins and everything, but it's adapted to have a lot of what are called leaflets. And so this is a method of preserving water. It's minimized its leaf surface, and because you imagine if this is one big leaf, that's a lot of water and everything to be able to maintain all that. And it's making a lot of these other little smaller leaves really kind of expendable if necessary, but it can still do a lot of the almost same level of photosynthesis by having a lot of smaller leaflets incorporated in that larger leaf. Now, yes? This one's more into like the Chihuahuan deserts and down into Baja. But yes, there is parts in the Sonoran Desert. So we like to think more floristically California. So I would include it into that. But it's not right. It's not directly within our political boundaries that humans have made as far as the natives of our area. But I would include it, yes, into a native. Now, also in the deserts, you have really hot areas, and so it actually will cause a lot of thermal changes within other environments connected with it. So you get a lot of wind. If you've ever been out, and that's why we have all these windmills out there in the desert, is one, it attracts a lot of wind. There's also a pinch of two, the San Jacinto and the San Gabriel's there, so it kind of acts like a carburetor, and it pushes a lot of wind through that area. And that's why we have the windmills there to capture that energy and use it. But wind is also can be really tough on plants to dry out a plant with wind, moving over that leaf surface area. In addition to that, it can do a lot of damage. If this was one big leaf and you have a really high wind, it could be like a sail of a sailboat and rip it off the plant, or damage it and rip the leaf and cause harm to the plant. So what it can do is have this type of structure and be able to have wind pass through it and with minimal harm. It can lose some of those leaflets, but it's not going to cause a big tear or lose the leaf entirely. So it's not just an adaptation to sunlight and the heat, but also to wind. So the environment around him in these hot areas. And then drought deciduousness. So we see this a lot with the coastal sage scrub around here. People say, "Oh God, I moved to California and on the coast and it's so brown right now." Well, yeah, a lot of those plants are dormant this type of year. We don't get our rains along the coast. We're in what's called a Mediterranean climate, and so a lot of those plants have gone dormant. Where other parts of the U.S. they go dormant in the winter when it's cold and snow and everything like that. Our plants here go a lot of dormancy in the summer when we don't have rain and it's hot and everything as well. But the deserts can really turn that adaptation on and off whenever it needs. And so a lot of these plants, like this ocotillo here, we have some great examples of the ocotillos out along this walkway here, and also in Casa La Paz as well. But these plants, you see all these little leaves coming off of the plant there. So it actually can make those leaves expendable and be like, it's too hot for me. I can lose a lot of water. I don't need to really produce a lot of photosynthesis right now because it actually has other adaptive traits. You can see there's green within the stems there. And you see the green on this as well. It's actually photosynthetic, meaning it's producing its own energy and food in its stems rather than the leaf. And so leaves can be really, on the ocotillo, can be expendable. And when it's a really hot period of drought, it can drop a leaf and say, I don't need it. And so I can still use a little bit of photosynthesis, or I can just shut down my metabolic processes, and just slow down and not need to. And then wait until moister areas and times in the winter, and then I can start to leaf out in a way and then go more actively growing. So that's another adaptation, is to be able to drop its leaves and make them a little more expendable or go drought deciduous. And then also those bark being that green photosynthetic, it can use not a leaf, and you can see that on cactus too. It has it in its stems or the larger area parts of the body and not just the leaf itself. And so this occurs for all plants where you have transpiration. So how plants move water through its body is it actually will open up its stomata, or a breeze within the leaf. It has water coming down through rain, and it picks it up through its roots. And then as the plant then has it's breathing really, it's expelling gaseous water out through its leaves and other parts there, and that causes a whole kind of move and pull of water through the entire plant, and that's actually how it can get water to a leaf up at top and everything like that, is by having the sun and radiation hitting the leaf. It's drying it out, it's evaporating a lot of water, and it's moving, and it has this whole pull. It's called turgor pressure of the plant, pulling water from the soil in and through it and out the leaf and plant itself. So that's called transpiration or evapotranspiration. And so plants can adapt in ways to minimize how much water is lost through the plant, because water is such a precious resource. So if you see these Baelia here, they're this desert marigold. You can see on these photos, beautiful plant in a landscape, big, bright yellow flowers, bugs, a lot of pollinators. I've seen a lot of little small, little native bees really like this plant as well. But you can see its leaves and on the flowers themselves will have a lot of hairs. And so those hairs, like we saw on this cactus, can be able to prevent a lot of radiation, or used like a sunscreen. But it's also conserving water, and here's how. So let's say you had like a real tropical leaf, not a lot of hairs, real big green. It's from an area with a lot of moisture. As the sun comes and hits the leaves, it's heating it up, and it's evaporating water as it breathes, and wind as well, in the environment is pulling water out of that leaf. And that's, like I said, that's how water gets moved up and through the plant itself, and how water's moved through the plant. But in tropical areas and other wetter environments, it doesn't need to use the energy to evolve all these types of traits. So it can just have a really big green leaf and just capture a lot of photosynthesis, and it'll expend water. Water's plentiful here. But desert plants will then some plants through the desert and other areas where it's arid will have a really fuzzy leaves. So if you guys want, pass this around. This is a desert plant here. This is a type of mallow. You can see it has a really, really fuzzy leaf. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of velvety. Great way to describe it. I'm going to always say that from now on. And so it has what's called a boundary layer. And so those hairs and everything have a layer of hair in and around, and it's preventing a lot of that air movement and circulation along the surface area of the leaf. And so from that, it's not pulling water out of the plant so fast. Also, it's again also doing that sun screening and bouncing the light away, so it's not heating up the leaf as much either, which will then lead to more water loss. So you'll see it in a lot of plants, not just desert plants, but you'll see that on a lot of other type of arid plants where they live. They'll have this kind of hairier structure on the plants. Tomentose is another name for that type of leaf, you would say, in botany. But all of that is because it has that boundary layer. Okay, so photosynthesis. So sorry, this gets a little bit triggering for anybody if they, it takes you back to your biology classes. I'm sorry. Don't worry, there's no exam, there's no test. Everybody passed, you're all good. So plants are awesome. They make their own food from the sun. I wish we could do that. But that's amazing. And so what it's doing is it's taking solar energy, light energy, and converting it to chemical energy, sugars. That's fascinating. It's literally creating sugars from the sun through other big processes like photosynthesis. So we know photosynthesis as being a process, H2O and water and light and CO2 and what that makes sugar. Cool. It is actually a way more complex process that just blows my mind that this is what almost all plants are doing at the time, just to live. And it's doing it constantly to survive. So, all right, let's go through this. All right, so okay. All right, we have water. I see water there, that's important. You got CO2, whew, that's everywhere. So it's pulling all that, and then it's using an enzyme to fix that carbon. Rubisco, got to have Rubisco, one of the largest, most abundant enzyme on the planet. I won't go. Don't worry, I won't go on to this. But it's creating energy with ATP and NADP, and it's exchanging electrons here and there, and it's all boiling down to sugar. And so what it's doing is, let's go more simple here. So it's taking carbon dioxide and water, using the light energy to then make that into a sugar, which is food for the plant, to do all of its biological processes, make leaves, make seeds for the next generation, everything like that, through sugar. And then it expels oxygen. It'll use a bit of oxygen as well, but then it gives off that oxygen, which we have adapted all to breathe. So cactus and succulents, if you've ever heard of cam plants, are really good at being able to evolve a really unique type of photosynthesis. And so they're called CAM plants, or crassulacean acid metabolism. So it's really hot in the desert, right? In arid conditions. So we have cactus like this saguaro here, or this cardone, and you have the dudleya here, one of my favorites, the live forevers. Those are succulents. Both of those have adapted a really unique way of photosynthesizing. And that's called crassulacean acid metabolism. A lot of succulents are actually in a family called the Crassulaceae family. But what it's doing is it actually will hold its breath during the day. It is so hot. Kurt, how hot was it in the desert in the last couple days? Do you know? Okay, so we're in that kind of peak of the summer, really, really hot. So like I said, plants will, when they breathe, and they open their stomata like this, that's a chance for it to then lose water. It's gaseous water water vapor is gonna expel out of the plant. It's gonna pull out and dry out a plant. So when it's so hot like that, these plants will actually they'll hold their breath during the day, but now you don't have CO2. Remember this? How is it going to photosynthesize during the day like that? So it's almost like if there's any surfers in the crowd, it's duck diving a wave, or the heat wave that comes through the day, and actually will then it'll fix the CO2 to a type of acid, malic acid, in its vacuoles here, which is kind of like a storage part of the cell. And so at night, when it's opening its stomata and breathing, where it's nice and cooler during the nighttime, there's not that heat that's hitting it with the sun. It's like, okay, I can breathe, and so it'll breathe in, it'll take in CO2, and it'll fix it through all these processes into malic acid and store it. And then during the day, when it's hot, it'll hold its breath, and then it's like, I have all these reserves of malic acid that I can then use some sun and be able to actually use the malic acid to then eventually use and create sugars. So it can still do photosynthesis, but it's a really unique way by storing it into its specific chemical to then use later. So that's where there's a lot of different ways that plants will do photosynthesis. Sometimes they're just constantly doing it, or they can do this really unique way to evolve to be able to survive in hot conditions. Okay, I mentioned cactus and succulents. I need to really dispel something real quick. So cactus, not all succulents are cactus, but cactus are succulents. So think of it as like a truck. A truck is a vehicle, and there's also sedans. So sedans and trucks are all vehicles. So we can say that in this example, the vehicles are succulents, but trucks are a type of family of trucks, so of vehicles. So cactus are only plants in the family Cactaceae. There's lots of other types of succulents, which are like Dudleya and the Crassulaceae family, and Echeverias, and the Ocotillo. There's a lot of different types of succulents, and that means anything that stores water or nutrients and other things in its parts, in its leaves, in its stems. They have succulent type parts. But not all succulents are cactus. I feel as it's a common thing. You guys are now, congratulations, you just graduated as more evolved botanists. So another type of succulent that you'll see around that we love in our Grayton gardens are agaves. We have agave desertii. Here's a really cool one down into Baja called agave perii, and a variety called truncata that's really architectural. So this is doing all that CAM type of metabolism, or the crassulacean acid metabolism. This is also doing that same thing that cactus are doing, but it's not a cactus. This is in the asparagus family. So this also has one life, meaning monocarpic. It means it uses all of its energy and will actually die out, or at least that part of the plant will die out to produce seed. But like I said, this plant is in the Asparagiaceae family. So I got some asparagus from Trader Joe's, and you can see those flower stalks are just big, giant asparagus. So I think it was at one point went to its own family, and then it went back into now being with in the asparagus family. But you can now see that now when you ever see and there's a couple of them out in the front as you leave here today, out flowering agaves with these huge flower stalks. Those are actually look like big asparagus because they are related. It's actually in the lily family too, or a lot of the lily type bulbs will also have very similar type of structures. But yeah, as you can see on this cartoon here, it actually will use all of its energy to put up this big flower stalk. And then by having this big giant telephone pole with all its seeds out there that can then kind of distribute out for the next generation. But it's such an exhausting property. It's using all that sugar, that photosynthetic sugar, to make that type of structure that actually will then die out. So I did it. I lived my part. Now it's time for the next generation and the seeds to go out. Now it will put on little pups around, what we call pups, or keikis, we called them in Hawaii. But they will have rhizomes that will come out and start to radiate out, like we talked about with the king clone and all those. But that process of storing a lot of sugars as a succulent and then starts to concentrate all to put out this big flower stalk is actually how they harvest to do tequila. So when they see that plant's about to start to, when the agave, it's actually there's agave tecliana as a species that's primarily, there's a couple different ones, but mainly that's the one that they will use for tequila. This humidor here will see that plant is it'll start to notice, okay, it's concentrating all its sugars, it's probably about to what they call bolt, and so then like, okay, that concentration of sugars is the highest, so then they will then harvest it. They'll cut off the leaves and get right to that corm, right in the middle of the plant, and then they'll roast that, and then so it gets all that sugar and loosens it all up, and then they'll ferment it and then distill it, and that's how they make tequila. But all that sugar and everything within that plant that makes that tequila was actually used to try to do this really big thing, which was to put out seeds for the next generation. So that's what means one life, or so monocarpic, or meaning that it's using all of its life and energy and will die out after. So if you have an agave and it's put on the flower stalk in your garden and you're seeing it starting, it doesn't look great anymore, you've done nothing wrong. We do get calls and things about that. No, that is just the natural cycle of that plant. You might still have little keikis and little pups that'll show up and replace that plant, another vegetative clone. So you didn't lose it entirely. You can actually pull those off as well if you see them around and repropagate them, where that plant can still live. But generally speaking, it's one life for that plant to put on that stalk and to the next generation. Now, yuccas are also succulents, very closely related, also in the asparagus family, but those are not, generally speaking, not monocarpic. So those will flower. You can see there's a couple of yuccas out here with big flower stalks right now. Actually, I think they're Hesperala or Nolinas and a few other types within this family of yuccas that are not monocarpic. So those will bloom year after year. You can cut those off and not worry. Those will still. So Joshua tree is a yucca brevifolia that we have here. And so those can continually flower, as you see up there, and that structure can keep growing in the tree into a tree-like form of yucca. Okay, so just to review all those types of adaptative traits, you have, thorn. So this is actually a thornless variety, but typically this Palo Verde would have thorns out in the environment. Does have the photosynthetic stems on there. It will expend a lot of these leaves if necessary. So it does have a drought deciduousness to them. It does have the bipinnate leaves in there as well. You have that vertical arrangement with the jojoba. You have the different type of thorns and sunscreening on the plant. You have the fuzziness of the leaves and everything. So all those desert plants I really want you to now see them in a different light and then see their adaptations and understand what they're doing there and appreciate them in your garden. The crassulacean acid metabolism. I love that I remembered how to say that because Kurt made me write it once on an exam. So, so yeah, desert plants in your garden. A lot of these desert plants do really, really well. They put on a lot of color in the springtime and summer. They put a lot of color. They can do really well in kind of rock gardens. If you do a desert garden, I encourage you not to use mulch. Because if you think about it, there's not really a lot of mulch in a desert garden, right? It doesn't have bark that's shedding off and leaf litter and everything like that in a desert scape. It's trying to conserve all those parts and not drop them as much, and because they're using all the water and things from them. And if you go out to the desert, what you'll see there is, sand and rock and gravel and so mineral mulches that do effectively the same thing of weed prevention and holding moisture and everything. Just telling that story in your garden, if you're using desert plants, use mineral mulch because it will help tell that story in a sense of feeling in place, and it can still use those types of things. So decomposed granite, rocks, pebbles, any type of different grades around will do that really well. And right now, like I said, a lot of our coastal and especially up in the chaparral and other areas have that drought deciduousness. Those plants have shut down for the summer, in these really hot conditions. So we always tell people the best time to plant a lot of those natives is in the fall, because that's the times where the temperatures, we wait until right about the temperatures break. And it gets really cool at nighttime, and then we have more mild type temperatures. That's the best time to plant because it's the longest time right before you have all our winter rains here, and then so it's watering those plants for you. Those plants will then establish with all those with all that water and moisture. So we say fall because it's the longest amount of time before we get to summer drought again, and so those plants have the greatest amount of time to grow and establish before summer. Now, desert plants are used to monsoonal rains. So up through Baja and in between the Gulf, it has a lot of rain and clouds that will come up and drop in the summer time when it's really hot. And these plants have adapted for that. So they love wet and hot type of temperatures. And so you can plant desert plants year-round, basically. So desert plants, you can absolutely. So all these do great with summer watering. So we have a lot of them out in the Casa right now. So if you guys need some help picking a lot of these, then yeah, they'll handle it as well. So they are natives, and generally speaking, we like to say that natives are best planted in the fall. These will be fine. So you guys are good. I will encourage, if a lot of you live by the coast, like immediate coast, don't plant some of the desert plants unless they're from Baja. Because those type of plants want to be, those are plants that have adapted near the coast. There's, like Mike said, where the desert meets the sea. But ones that are really kind of way more inland type of deserts, those you would want to do not near the coast. So this plant, I see it constantly. I live in Dana Point. This plant would just suffers, and it just gets these mildews, really, because it's not adapted to that type of environment. And so what they do, because it's a city and not sure, they just tear it out and replace the same plant with the same plant, and then the cycle starts all over again. Just horrible mildew plants. They wonder why it doesn't grow. They give it more water, which leads to more mildews and things like that. But so if you are living near the coast, you can still have desert plants, but I encourage you to plant Baja natives from there. Okay. So kind of went through all that. They are adapted for wind and hardiness and heat, low water use. Spring and summer color. They just have explosions of flowers when they do bloom, because they only have a short window for a lot of pollinators and things like that. And so we'll meet some of the plants here. So like I said, here's a desert mallow. There's a couple mallow type plants out in the desert. The desert's actually evolved. Like I said, it's a desertification. They evolved to be a desert. A lot of those actually have kind of tropical roots to them. So if you go down further down into Mexico, you get into more tropics. And so you have a lot of these kind of tropical type plants, at least in their origin, that then became desert type plants. They evolved to be desert plants. The desert iguana, it's a true iguana. It has the little spines if you look real close enough. It's evolved from, and you can see that evolutionary history. Jojoba, again, really great plant, super, super adaptable and really hardy and able to survive. And a large distribution, like I said, down into Baja and also out into our deserts here. The beaver tail cactus is just one of the most, there's nothing prettier than a cactus flower, I think. And this really displays it with that kind of purpley, magenta type flower colors. Creosote, again, this, and I have you guys all come up, grab a little bit of leaf, not too much so we can have the plant, but if you put a hot breath on it, you can smell it'll then allow a lot of that aromatics to come out. If you've ever been out to the desert after a rain, this is what it smells like, and it's all that creosote. Really incredible plant, really great medicinal plant as well. These Enothera, I don't remember the common name for them, but occur kind of in and around sand dunes and rocky areas. Really great plant with really big, smaller composite, with really big flowers on them. The Fallujah, or the Apache plume, occurs more up in Mojave and into like a Great Basin as well. Has really interesting flower and fruit structures onto them. The desert willow is and what we see in this photo here, does go deciduous in the winter, so it will drop its leaves. This is a variety that has a more purple type of flower, but our native bumblebees really love this. Hummingbirds, you can tell, really love this. Great food. You can see there's a ton of flowers on here for desert tortoise. This is one of the preferred ones if anyone has that. These tacomas as well, again, or yellow bells. They also give such a profuse amount of flowers. Great for desert tortoise. I did do a desert tortoise talk once. I felt like I worship my desert tortoise when I you can gather all these flowers and fruit parts, and a lot of these desert tortoise love them. And it just feels like you're worshiping it, throwing all these flowers to it. But yeah, you can see it gives you a lot of warm and inviting type of color in the garden, and it has some tropical origins to them as well. So, this one here. So this is called Baelia multiradiata, or desert marigold. It is a perennial, but really I would treat it like an annual. You know, they're kind of more biennials. They could live into the next, through multiple years. They do reseed too, but not really aggressively out here. But yeah, really great plant, low growing with lots of flowers. You see a lot of them as you come into the casa, into the nursery as well. Okay, that's what I got for you.